Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. The thing I'm really interested in is how do we create organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. This podcast has been running since January 2011, and so we have a big archive to explore. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. Now, before we get into the interview, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to the folks at HubSpot for sponsoring my podcast this month. Now, HubSpot have built an AI-powered customer platform with all the software, integrations, and resources that you need to connect your marketing, sales, and service. It's all very, very cool. So do check them out at HubSpot.com. And also thank you to them for sponsoring my podcast this month. So now that you know that, let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Vivek Sharma, who is the CEO and co-founder at Movab Inc. Hey, Vivek, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Adrian. Thank you for having me on your pod.
You're very, very welcome. Now, I always ask people at the beginning of the podcast, I could do a big bio. You send me a bio, I could read it out and do all these different things. But I always ask people to introduce themselves, to give their listeners and also the readers of the highlights a bit of a flavor about you and the work that you do, kind of where you're coming from, all that sort of like stuff. And so over to you, Vivek. Give me a thumbnail sketch.
Yeah. By the way, I will note, I was intrigued by the name of your latest book, Punk XL and Punk CX. Before that, this whole punk attitude. One of my favorite movies is out of England called The 24-Hour Party People, which
Nice.
starts with a bunch of wannabe bands watching a Sex Pistols concert and being inspired to start their own bands, and Joy Division and Happy Mondays and all these other bands came out of that and created the Manchester scene. So it's great. Punk is great for an attitude and a different approach to music. And hopefully Movab, my company, has an unconventional view on marketing.
Awesome.
So my background, way back in 2010, my co-founder, Michael Nutt, and I, we both had e-commerce backgrounds. I built e-commerce systems. Michael was our CTO was at a company called Guilt Group that did flash sales. And we didn't have a lot of exposure to email marketing. In fact, I was probably the most clueless person and literally had to sign up for a MailChimp account, a Campaign Monitor account to understand what an email marketer did in their flow. But email was an intriguing channel for me because it is a ubiquitous channel. Everyone uses it. Everyone has an inbox. It knows so much about them. It is their digital wallet. I still go back and find old emails to understand the context of a conversation I'm having now.
Sure.
And in terms of marketing, what was interesting about this was that the big email service providers like ExactTarget, Responsys, Cheetah Mail, and Epsilon were primarily focused on delivery. How do we get messages out the door at a high throughput? Maybe some data management, but content was an afterthought.
Right.
And so that was the initial inkling of an idea that personalization is failing, not for these latter reasons, which seem mostly solved, but because the experience you're delivering to the end consumer isn't differentiated, isn't tailored to them. So we got our start there with an essential innovation that would change an email at the moment you open it. So the moment you open it, we'd be able to dynamically compose images using data sources and put that in front of you. And we even had contextual factors like the weather outside, the time of day, the device that you're on. But fast forward about 14 years later, and what we're building is something that we believe it's a new era of marketing, and we're building an autonomous marketing platform. And we've made a pretty considerable progress from that initial light bulb going off to where marketing is really going in this decade.
Awesome. And the reason, thank you for that. And that's great. It's and I can see how that genesis, that idea can then start to expand beyond kind of like the channel of email, as it were, because that contextual, relevant, dynamic sort of personalization effort, as it were, is prevalent on all channels, regardless of kind of whether it's kind of email or not. It's across the piece, and it's something that
content is everywhere, right? It's a connect issue, whether you're receiving a push notification or an email or a website interaction. It's content. There's something you're looking at, that is either moving you to act or moving you to disengage.
But the thing I wanted to talk to you about, and the thing that precipitated our discussion about having a chat on the podcast, was that I love a bit of research. I love a report, a few stats here and there. You can have a rummage around and kind of look at them and think about kind of what do they mean. It's always a good sort of catalyst. And so Movable Inc. recently published a report called 2024 Audience of One, and before digging into it and some of the things that came out of the report, I wondered if you could give me an idea of some of why you did it and some of the main headlines and findings coming out of the report.
Yeah, we did this report because we wanted to understand from marketers everywhere how personalization has changed in their viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And one of the lenses we've looked at is there's been decades and there's been a key enabling technology that has allowed marketers to do what they do. In the 90s, we all got our start with database marketing, which is putting our lists in a digitized format. In the 2000s, it was usually a channel specific platform like an email service provider or a mobile marketing platform. In the 2010s, it was about a single view of the customer and pulling in a CDP or a data warehouse. And in the 2020s, we believe there's a big shift happening to systems of autonomy. And that's how personalization, it's opening up new types of opportunities. So we put a report out and surveyed a number of marketers. I think it was about 1,000 marketers and called it the Audience of One, and wanted to understand how marketers are thinking about individualization and getting personalization to the next level. And the timing coincided, very interestingly, with OpenAI launching ChatGPT,
right,
which suddenly put AI in the forefront. And, the year or two prior to that, AI was being used, but maybe not at that scale. And now everyone is thinking and talking about AI. And, what does that mean for marketer productivity, for customer engagement, for personalization? These are the kinds of questions we were asking marketers everywhere.
Okay, cool. Now, before we dig into some of the things that stood out for me, I wanted to maybe just circle back and say, tell me a little bit more about this autonomous system sort of thing. Because that feels like, does that mean it's less campaign driven and it's more responsive and dynamic to kind of customers' needs and preferences and actions and so on and so forth? Or educate us, Vivek, educate us, please.
Yeah. So if you look at how, whether it's an email marketer or a mobile marketer, how they conduct their time, there's this legacy process called a campaign that everything is built around, and a campaign calendar. And this is true whether you're using Salesforce Marketing Cloud or using one of the new gen marketing platforms like a Braze. But the email that you got in your inbox this morning may have been planned 6 months ago.
Right.
And there's a calendar that gets filled out. Merchandisers argue and debate what should go in there, what date something should go, what kind of discount should be run. And everything is from a marketer's point of view about what they want to do. And this legacy process, is from the print era. It's really funny to think we digitize all these things. We want to achieve personalization, and yet we're beholden to this campaign process that is decades old, and in many ways holds us back from realizing how to deliver a customer experience that really puts customer over campaign.
Right.
So what if, the question we're asking ourselves is, what if we could live in a world where the 1 million people that you're that are on your list that you're messaging with, you could understand their wants and needs and where they're likely to go next in their buyer's journey, and be able to serve up kind of build a campaign around each person as an individual rather than this legacy campaign process. And this is already being done to some level, where if you have a triggered email or a journey, there's some behavior that's expressed on a website, we kind of follow that up with a tailored communication around that behavior. But the batch program has, that's a 97% of your audience that is not engaging, that has not made a purchase from you. And there's a lot of opportunity there in being able to listen to the subtle signals and maybe make that batch program feel a lot more personalized, like your trigger program. And in fact, not have to plan it directly. The idea of autonomy is you're going to have to give up some control to a machine, but the machine's going to present options to you about how it's going to tailor everything for everyone. And you will have oversight. You're the supervisor of this factory that has 1,000, machines kind of working on your behalf and figuring out what's best for each person. And you're going to get a better customer relationship. You're going to increase revenue for your company, and you're going to improve upon marketer productivity, because a lot of your time right now is just feeding this campaign treadmill that nobody's really enjoying. Nobody got into marketing to do that.
Right. But that doesn't remove the sort of the utility or the value of running campaigns. That this is like it's almost like this is run in parallel, would it? Or does it remove the need for campaigns?
It uses the campaign as a vehicle, and it reimagines what the campaign is really like.
Okay.
So a thing we've been able to do, we acquired a company called Coherent Path that had built an AI engine, and it's a fascinating approach that takes this campaign concept, but creates a million personalized versions of that for each individual. That thinks about what story do I need to tell each customer on their path of discovery. So rather than just being reinforcement based, how do I figure out where they're going next and introduce them to a category, much like a personal shopper would if you walked into a high-end boutique? How do I figure out the right send time for this person if they're likely to respond? What's the right frequency for, Jack versus Jill? Maybe 5 times a week for Jack, but Jill is, you should lay back and it's only twice a week. How do you write copy in the way that it is in a tone and a voice that this person would respond to? There's a lot of decisions that are being made. And frankly, with this traditional campaign process, most marketers punt on that. They're not really making those decisions, and there's a lowest common denominator that gets applied to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And we could exist in a world where we're highly personalizing this, what we call a campaign, but it behaves very differently, that is completely individualized, and still have a marketer in the loop, a human in the loop, overseeing this and making sure it is being done in a way that they would that they can get a lot of comfort, and they start to trust the machine. And this is kind of like the autonomous car,
right?
Where the safety record is higher. And you've got Waymo. I was just in San Francisco. They've got Waymo cars driving around, robo cars driving around, and the safety record is higher and the results are greater. But the human still wants to have the control and the trust to be able to take over if something goes astray. So I think we're going to see more and more of this happen in marketing departments, and there's major brands that are doing this today and seeing amazing results.
Awesome. Well, thank you for explaining that, because I think it's important. I just wanted to clarify that just before we can move on. So then going back to the report, there was a couple of things that I noticed in the report I wanted to ask you about. And the first thing was that it said the report says that 26% of marketeers are currently using AI for content creation, and that sort of alludes to some of the things that you were saying before. And but I was thinking about that relative to other things and soundings and results and research that I've seen it, because that number to me sort of feels kind of low, given that content creation is often cited as being one of the main bottlenecks in personalization efforts. I mean, do you think that the number is low, or is that people are just being a bit tentative with some of their use of leverage of AI?
I do think that number is low, and I believe it's for a good reason, which is there are many components to marketing where you can kind of reduce things down to data and write a query and know objectively, put someone down this path or that path. Let me back up for a second, maybe define content creation, because I think it means all sorts of things to different people.
Okay.
We have a product called Studio that works on content composition. So it isn't entirely new and new image completely reimagined. It's actually taking existing branded assets that the brand owns, connecting to data sources and overlaying that data on top of that imagery. So you might have this person's loyalty point balance. You might have their membership status. You might have recommendations from, restaurant recommendations for their credit card, overlaid on an image that is resonant. So there's an active composition happening. There's another aspect around content decisioning. Here are all the creatives this person's eligible for, and what's the ideal thing to select from this group of 12 things I could show and pick the right thing for this person. There's the idea of content generation. That could be image generation, that could be copy generation. What we're seeing with our customers is a greater willingness to explore with copy. What is the subject line for this email? Because it is they've got copywriters already on staff, and we're talking about augmenting these copywriters and giving them a feedback loop. They can evaluate something, and the marketer in the loop can decide these feel like they're on brand, or these things need a little bit more prompting to see closer to what our brand represents. With the imagery, what we are seeing is a greater concern. I think there's so much higher bar to clear for marketers, especially enterprises, where something that is made by a design team, maybe augmented by, kind of assembled together, augmented by AI versus AI replacing it, there might be a little bit more comfort for. And you're seeing Adobe's Firefly, for example, that is generating stock photography, right? You might go to Shutterstock or you might go to Adobe Firefly. And that might be the first way you start to pull in some generated imagery. But there is a much higher bar and sensitivity on a number of dimensions, from the provenance. How did this imagery train? Am I violating copyrights from other company, trademarks from other company? And what's being generated, does it really represent my brand? Has it been trained on my brand only, or am I getting kind of a mix of everything that's out there that actually erodes my brand and doesn't represent? So I think it's a higher bar to clear for if you're thinking about image generation, but a number of these other aspects, and probably subject line generation is probably the low hanging fruit many companies have gone after first.
Okay, so I guess it feels to me what you're saying is that the using AI for content, as it were, it's probably higher in some aspects, got much lower, and it's just averaging out at that sort of that sort of level.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of interest, but then there's the interest meeting the reality and saying, are we willing to go? What's the risk reward look like on this, and what is practically possible? There are things we're doing today that, using AI, I would have thought in 3 years ago, this seems impossible. This seems like crazy for an enterprise to make a bet on an approach like this. But sure enough, we're starting to see major companies adopt this and checking the boxes of the kind of safety that they're looking for, safety and trust that they're looking for.
Okay. So the report then goes on and says, and here's the quote from the report, and it says that an overwhelming majority, i.e. 95%, concur that AI's automation of manual tasks permits a more strategy-focused approach, with tasks like content personalization and segmentation, targeting, content ideation, sentiment analysis, etc., being the direct beneficiaries. The thing I wanted to ask about that was, are you also seeing brands and customers directly benefiting from this automation via a rise in engagement rates, campaign ROI, improved commercial returns, etc.? Because for me, it's all very well marketeers kind of going, yeah, it's brilliant, our lives are easier, we can kind of we don't have to work as much or work as hard, but yet ultimately the thing that I'm interested in the end is better outcomes. Can we improve customer outcomes? Can we improve employee outcomes? Can we improve kind of business outcomes? And if we get the trifecta, those all three things together, then win-win-win. That's the nirvana. So are you seeing brands getting direct benefits out of the use of these tools in terms of that engagement, campaign ROI, improved commercial returns as well?
Yeah, this is a great observation. And I would say since ChatGPT launched early last year, everyone's been talking just about generative AI, but AI is a broader thing than just LLM-based approaches. And the way a lot of companies are bolting GPT into their solution is, here's an existing workflow that we've built, and how do I skip steps or put shortcuts and advisors in here that will automatically build a segment or generate a few subject line, options, or verify the email content and the links that they're not broken links, for example. And each of these things are valuable in productivity improvements and maybe lessening the amount of time marketers spending on that element. But we question this idea. It's still beholden on the traditional campaign process. So you're bolting on some things here and making AI do certain things in those steps a little bit better, which is useful. Those productivity gains are useful. But the question we ask ourselves is, now that AI is here, is there a radical rethinking that might be possible of breaking up that traditional approach and figuring out how do you serve every single individual something totally unique to them? And so that's the approach Movab has taken with DaVinci. And in fact, one of the big goals, as a primary goal, is first, how do we delight the customer? How do we make sure that they are fully engaged? Because if the customer wins, your business will win. And what we see is lowered unsubscribes, greater engagement, a waking of dormant subscribers, revenue increases. I'll share one example. Victoria's Secret
Yep.
Victoria's Secret is a brand that we work with. And for many people who've known them, and they used to be a customer of ours on our original product called Studio, which is
Okay.
kind of composing these images, no AI. And this is a brand from the aughts that was people are familiar with in the malls. And it had a very single type of brand, a singular brand that looked the same for everyone and imagined every customer of theirs kind of looking the same. And in the last 5 years, they've gone through a pretty dramatic transformation, but they're realizing that every customer is an individual and there's different styles and tastes and fashions and body types. And to be able to talk to everyone in the way that in the area that is of their interest. And this became an especially crucial thing to solve because they had a huge number of dormant subscribers on their list that were simply not engaging, and the brand was starting to see revenue plateau
Right.
and challenges occur there. And so we met with Victoria's Secret and proposed a radical, then seemingly radical idea, which is let's get rid of your old process with this long planning cycle. Let's have a completely AI automated version and let's go run a test. Let us take the next 8 weeks and we will run your business as usual program. We'll create a synthetic proxy to mimic that BAU program. So at some point you can stop doing the BAU and still have a control that you can test. And we'll have this AI generated version. And the net impact of that was double-digit returns in revenue increases, double-digit increases in conversions, much higher click-through rates. Their customers the dormant subscribers were waking up, and people started to get introduced to new categories that they may not have considered before.
Right.
So on every metric that was being measured, the CFO, you've got to, especially in an economy like the last few years, the CMO and the CFO are very aligned at the hip, and you've got to deliver those financial outcomes for the business. And these softer outcomes, you start to notice that your customers are engaging more. And that is good long-term durable health and long-term customer lifetime value for your business.
Awesome. That's a great example because it does, as you say, it's like it gives it meaning, and it also gives it meaning with a named kind of brand, because that's one of the things I was sort of concerned about. I'm a bit like going, well, this is all great. I mean, you can generate more, you can and you make it easier, you can kind of like run kind of more things, but I'm a bit like, but more doesn't automatically mean better.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I wanted to understand is like, are we is that these new facilities and abilities and capabilities translating into better? And that's a great example of how it's kind of translating.
In fact, about 2 months ago, we do an annual client summit, both in the US in New York and in London. The London one coming up in October. Would love to have you there if you're free around then.
Well, let me know the dates and I'll see what I can do.
Wonderful. But there were 4 principles we kind of laid out for all of the brands sitting in the room. There were 700, 800 marketers sitting in the room. And customer experience was number one, making sure we're bettering the customer experience and they're delighted. Marketer productivity was a second one, because if you have a solution that is going to take 50%, 100% more work for the marketing team, you're not going to win the marketing team over. Mm-hmm. And they're going to drop this, and there will be obstacles created. So can you lessen the amount of time that marketers, and I think there's a lot of productivity gains we've talked about. Financial performance is the third one. And the fourth one is about trust, enterprise trust. And for us, that means we spend so much of our time playing offense and hitting big numbers and winning things, but we have to manage risk as well. And privacy, safety, and security are 3 components that we are taking care of our first party data and the customer's trust with us, what they've shared. And these things don't leak out to other companies. Safety, that we have a high bar for how AI models work, and there's data leakage to public models. And security, that there's world-class protection in a world of new cyber threats that are emerging every single week. It is imperative that marketers take this responsibility and select the technologies that are prizing that and not just rushing headlong into AI without thinking about the protections the business needs.
Yeah.
And that is coming up a lot more with AI councils that are forming in businesses to evaluate. And there's excitement, but hold on. There's a lot of enterprise value we've created, and let's be careful and understand what we're bringing in here.
Because that's really interesting. Because the thing that I wanted to bring up, there's a section in the report which talks about AI ethics and concerns, and there was a statistic in there that says 42% of marketers are concerned about the absence of human supervision with these systems. And I wanted to ask, I mean, that made me think, is that a natural concern given that we're transitioning to automated systems? Or is it, as you're kind of talking about just then, is it that they're just being careful, evaluating kind of risk? Or is there's this natural resistance to it's different and we're kind of like slow to change? That the pace of changing technology is completely outpacing our own ability to change.
Yeah, I think some of this is probably consumer software, the big public models like OpenAI's and Anthropic's and Meta's Claude model. These things are all probably driving these questions for people, because a year and a half ago, everyone was reading about these instances where there would be horrible biases presented by AI, or it would say things and it was sweeping out public data. There were all kinds of things. This is kind of a open frontier where all sorts of things are happening. And this was something, kind of a wake up call to enterprise marketers, excitement and seeing what is possible with AI. But when they started thinking about their own businesses, realizing that there has to be a much higher bar than what is happening with public models. So what you're seeing with big brands, more control over trading data, on provenance, on knowing that there's not going to be legal issues. So ethics is one aspect, but there's certainly you don't want an AI run amok, tarnishing your brand, serving something to your customer that is just completely tone deaf. And if you can start to put some guardrails around what the trading data is, what the range of outcomes that the AI can influence, the span of control it has versus a chatbot. There are companies that put chatbots on their website that use a public LLM, and there's instances where someone got a chatbot to sell them a General Motors car for $1. Got to talk about that, and then it started to talk in expletives about the brand that they represent. And so this is a thing, kind of an open model that is being applied that can really tarnish your brand. And it's something that one should be careful about if you're an enterprise, versus something that someone understands the inputs into the model, what the potential outputs can be, and what the supervision looks like, that there's a marketer in the loop. So it's forcing these types of questions that I don't think marketing departments and information security teams had to contend with previously. But a lot of companies haven't had a checklist of how do I evaluate this? How do I even evaluate a technology that is AI? We haven't purchased something like this before and given it such a span of control. And so that's where the brakes got put on, and everyone's creating these lists and trying to evaluate and saying, what are both the ethical standards and the security and the safety standards we need this thing to comply with?
So given that this is such a fast moving kind of area, and in terms of what people are doing, and also some of the examples that are coming kind of back from people being able to, or for models just doing some weird sort of like stuff, and also people holding those models to account, and companies then being told by legal authorities, judges and the like, that no, you can't blame that on the technology. That technology represents you, and therefore it's what it says sort of like stands. I mean, there's been numerous examples where chatbots have come up with kind of things, and the company's denied it or said, no, that's a mistake, and then they've taken them to court, and the legal kind of authorities are going, no, that's part of your estate. That the chatbot, whatever it might be, is an actor under your kind of brand, and therefore you have to honor that. So I understand there's all these different sort of things going on. So what sort of recommendations would you make to help marketers evaluate sort of what sort of AI-powered solution might be the best fit for them and their needs? Because, I mean, also, you can look at the, I know that, what's the guy's name that does the MarTech sort of like stack?
Scott Brinker, who's got the 14,000 companies, MarTech companies that have been formed. Yeah.
I mean, so there's a MarTech stack, and then somebody, there's another, so Scott Brinker, he's been doing that forever, and there's a element of that which is marketing and customer experience, and somebody's been doing a customer experience one, and it's just like, it's crazy as well. It's almost a bit of a drilling in into a subset. I mean, it's mind-boggling how many different sort of solutions are out there. So yeah, what sort of recommendations would you give to marketers to help them sort of navigate find the right tool for their particular situation and their particular need.
Yeah, Scott Brinker's thing, it reminds me of, back in New York, LA, a couple decades ago, someone might have said, "Oh yeah, I'm in a band." Now it's, "Oh yeah, I've started a MarTech company." Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
very few make it to the upper echelons. And Terry Kawaj over at Luma Partners, they did the Lumascapes. I asked him a couple of years ago, and he mentioned, I think 60 companies out of those 14,000 have made it past 100 million in run rate.
Right.
So there's a lot of contenders, but there's only so much bandwidth marketing departments have to absorb new technologies. So this is a great question, and I didn't know the answer to this, frankly. How
Okay.
marketers decide to adopt new technologies. And so a thing I did 5 months ago was I said, I don't know the answer to this. Let me talk to some marketers that we know, because they brought AI into their organization. And how do they pull this off? And how do they succeed at this? And I really started to document this, and I talked to a handful of marketers, and I started to create a kind of a synthetic profile. And one marketer wanted a combination of two things. One realized they were just hitting a hard plateau. Their business was not doing well, and I think both you and I have been around the '90s when the internet the web was poo-pooed or trivialized by people who didn't get it, and they kind of dragged their feet. And young upstarts understood what it meant and were willing to innovate and explore this new territory, and it completely transformed every single industry. And a similar thing is happening with AI. And I think the Gen Xers, who I call myself a member of that generation.
Me too.
We've lived through that, and we've seen this story before. And I think we're willing to go explore this and understand it, and not just say this is going to go away and this is not going to be important. So this first marketer really evaluated their business, and they were plateauing. The performance wasn't there, and they knew they needed a new approach. And they were willing to explore a new approach simply because the business as usual was not working as they had hoped for. So performance numbers aren't great. They had to evaluate a new approach, and they were willing to go talk to different companies about what that might look like. Another marketer was very specific, and they wanted a couple things. They wanted an ability to test their way into a new approach and be able to validate that they're seeing the proof points. And they wanted to partner with a big vision. And this was interesting because they're not just thinking about the short term. If they're going to bet on a fundamentally new approach, how could that scale? How could that look 2 years down the line, 4 years down the line? And are they betting on the right horse for the long term is kind of the question. So handling scale, of course, some of these businesses send tens of millions of emails out a week, multiple times. A strong philosophy on trust and safety was important, in this world of cyber threats, and a deep understanding of their industry and their problems. So it was great to be able to talk to marketers who would walk this road, and what kind of thoughts, both opportunities they were excited about, but concerns that they had, they were trying to validate down that checklist. And it gave us a sense of what the objective evaluation process looks like. And frankly, these individuals were, what we'd consider change agents now. It does take someone bold to be on that frontier, to evaluate these things, create a plan, and do things from first principles. So especially in a new territory, just reading Forrester papers or, McKinsey briefs, you can be the expert in a new frontier if you have curiosity and you're willing to learn, you're willing to go explore, and you could very quickly become the leading expert. So these types of change agents we're seeing happen more in different companies that are understanding there's a transition happening, and it is imperative to move your company into the future, and they're willing to go take the reins, and they're also going to reap the rewards when that happens.
I think sometimes I think in analogies, and one analogy has just occurred to me just then. It's a movie analogy, or movie analogy. You remember the animated film Up? Remember the dog, the talking dog that always responded to the squirrel? He was like, "Squirrel," and then he's like pointing the other way. It feels like there's a lot of marketeers that are acting like that now. There's all these things, they're getting bombarded, all these kind of things, and they're almost all over the place. But it feels also to me that these change agents that you're talking about, and this is not necessarily an exclusive group. I mean, anybody can be a change agent.
Yes.
It's about, for me, it's about, I guess, two things. It's about being frustrated with the current situation and recognizing that frustration, and then trying to convert that frustration into a desire to create something kind of better. And then that allows you then to question the assumptions that you're making and the ways that you're making, the ways that you're doing. But then also then pushes you to go, well, we need to imagine or envision what it needs to be. And too many people don't take that last step. They can have the frustration, but then they go shopping around. But actually, I think it's the people that are probably really successful are the ones that go, actually, you know what? I need to have an understanding of what I think that we need to create in order to help me understand who I need to talk to and why. And if we can get a melding of visions, then you end up getting the making of a better partnership.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of these things. Steve Jobs famously said, "Good artists create and great artists steal." And that Sex Pistols concert again at these bands influenced by seeing something so radically different, by seeing a punk band and kind of break the rules, went off and created something new, influenced by that. So I think you're going to see some similar things with marketers who some will come up with their own ideas about things that they want to see and realize. And there's a curve, right? There are early adopters who are going to go vet this and will be willing to take those chances and go explore new things. And at some point, the early majority of the laggards will follow. And that's a perfectly fine thing for different businesses. I think time is more compressed now. I don't think a decade to kind of go process something and then go decide to do something that you might have had several decades ago. So I do think some combination. There's no one path to this, and look and research outside the building. There's kind of the knowledge within your company, but there can be kind of groupthink and a bubble and dogma that can be associated with that too. So getting out there, getting exposed to a lot of different ideas, going to conferences, going to webinars, reading things, talking to your colleagues, your counterparts at other companies. These are all really good things to do to complete the picture and form your own point of view about the path you see taking forward. And I think the individuals anyone can become a change agent. You're absolutely right. Having the courage to do it, and these are the people who are going to see their careers succeed and go to that next level. And frankly, they're driven by curiosity. They didn't get into marketing to just sit at a desk and grind out campaigns week after week. If you're learning something new, if you're growing, if you're slightly uncomfortable, that's a good place to be. And I think a lot of marketers want that career again, where they feel energized to do something new and different and do bigger picture stuff instead of toil away on the campaign treadmill.
You mentioned the book Punk XL, and one of my most favorite parts of the book is there's a quote that came from Arlo Guthrie in an interview about his dad, Woody Guthrie. And he said that his dad, when asked the question, what is the role of folk music in protest? And he said, the role of folk music in protest is to disturb the comfortable and to comfort the disturbed. And I love that. And I've got a poster of it in my office. And I think the thing that you said just reminded me of that, because it made me think, actually, if you find yourself slightly disturbed, then go look for people that are slightly disturbed.
Yeah.
In a inverted commas kind of like sort of way.
There's little communities, there's little pockets, and especially in today's world, they gather, and these early movements end up being very big things later on. So follow your intuition about that.
Yeah. Brilliant. So apart from me saying, you should people listening should definitely check out your new report, this 2024 Audience of One, which I'll put a link to in the show notes and stuff. I mean, is there anything else, Vivek, that you'd like to add or highlight that we've missed out before I ask you some quick fire wrap up questions?
No, I would just say we live in very interesting times, and it's fascinating about the changes that are happening in the world and how technology is playing such a big part in it. So if nothing, everyone should just get informed, and the level of how involved you want to be, it's up to you. But I think everyone will be well served by reading and learning and, continuing to be students through life.
Perfect. So a few quick fire questions, but just to finish up, because I know that we talk about a bunch of different things, and what I do at the end of these podcasts right now is to ask people a couple of questions. And also the first one is just to boil everything down. And so what I've been doing is I've been asking people to complete this sentence. And the sentence is, if you want to improve your customer or employee experience, let's make it customer experience here. Vivek Sharma says, do this. Vivek, over to you. Complete that sentence.
The only thing that works is walking in the shoes of that employee or that customer. That is the truest way you can learn. The next best thing is to talk to people directly, and many of them, and understand their experience. And in the early days, we did this. We would sell a client, and me and the original salesperson, we would set up campaigns for the client and run everything end to end to fully understand what the drawbacks and pitfalls can be. And with new employees, my co-founder and I still do a new hire session, and we ask them, "How is your onboarding? What's been easy? What hasn't been easy?" We know the company too well now, and we're biased because of that. But this fresh thinking, what are you seeing? What are you experiencing? And being able to kind of taste and feel that firsthand is really the only way to keep yourself honest.
Fantastic. And so the second question is that it's obviously it has to be a punk related one. And you mentioned kind of Punk XL, and the XL stands for experience leadership or experienced leader. I mean, which one brand or company or an organization do you think takes a punk approach to CX, or is it this experienced leader? Who's got it all knitted together? Who's leading the way? The one that you go, yeah, I always keep an eye on them. I always like what they're doing. Who stands out for you?
Yeah. I think, my understanding of punk, it was a pushback against like progressive rock.
Yeah.
That was a little bit more too intellectual and thoughtful and classical music approach. And it was like, throw all that stuff out. It's the attitude, it's the noise, it's the breaking through walls. We've certainly experienced that. And, I used to be an engineer, so the bias is to have the objectively kind of perfectly logical thing. But in the last 4 years, when we've gone through a pandemic, SVB, our bank collapsed, Apple Mail made some changes. Sometimes the answer is you just got to punch through the wall and find a way forward. Don't overthink it. There's always a path.
Right.
Recently I was watching a movie, Apollo 13, with my kids.
Okay.
And, these astronauts were coming back, and suddenly all manner of problems started to happen. And, they were running out of air. There was too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They had to keep the heat up. They had to move into a lunar module to make it back to Earth. The heat shields, how are they going to shield as they're re-entering the atmosphere? And to be able to roll with new things coming at you and just solve problems as they come at you and be at peace, have a sense of calmness. So NASA had that in the heyday. I think things slowed down, maybe things got bureaucratic. And I think SpaceX for space travel is a rule breaker and does things very unconventionally. And sometimes you have to do things like that in order to make big leaps forward.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Great. I think I'm going to put in NASA, Apollo 13 and SpaceX into all that just because a nod to all of them. So final question. I mean, you did say earlier that we live in interesting times, and I think that's very, very what would I say? A gentle assessment of the times that we live in. And because I find myself out, so I try and end these podcasts on good news stories, just to try and throw off a little bit of the shade that seems to be happening, and they'll get us away from some of the doom scrolling, but also just to give people a chance to sort of say, here's the thing that I've seen in the last week or so that I've just thought, that's great, that's brilliant, that's made me smile, made me feel kind of warm and fuzzy on the inside, because I don't think there's enough of that around. So Vivek, kind of give me a good news story.
Yeah. This is the year the Olympics, the Summer Olympics are happening. And so despite all of the division and different points of view and what happens around the world, it's beautiful to see, amateur athletes strive at their hardest to focus on winning, to be for excellence in whatever field. And I think winning doesn't get talked about as much, and people sometimes are coy about it, but wanting to, it drives personal growth to strive to be the best in your field and to see, every sport. My wife is from Germany, so there's mixed, loyalties about American teams and German athletes. But regardless, everyone around the world being passionate, following that passion to be the best at their space, and for us to all unite and see amazing athleticism across so many different sports every few years in the Olympics is, tells me very positive things about humanity.
Fantastic. I think that's a great spotlight on the Olympics, because we've been, as we currently speak, we are early parts of August, and this will come out towards the end of August. But my wife and I have been gorging on the Olympics just for that very reason. One, because we're fans of athletics, but also of sports. But some of the things that have been going on is truly marvelous. But also some of the camaraderie within the sports and within the across the teams, but also within the individual competitors. I think it's just, you're absolutely right. It's a great example of what we really are.
Absolutely. Fully agreed.
Vivek, thank you for that. That's been brilliant. Thank you congratulations on the report. Congratulations on your success, to date. May it long continue. Just want to say thank you so much also for spending some time with me today. That's been awesome.
This was wonderful, Adrian. Thank you. This felt like 10 minutes and we're at a pub in England catching up over a conversation. So thank you for an enjoyable chat.
You're very welcome. Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. Do tune in again. Thanks very much.